Hey guys, welcome back. So in the last video, we got this far. So we tried to write a function on the accounts table to get the account balance. Right. So we tried to select it. So we got the account balance. Right. So we're able to get it. Uh, and one way that you can use functions is you can get the account balance of each one of them. How can we get that? So functions provide this utility. I can select from the accounts, right? So if I have the accounts, I can call of this account ID. Right? This is I'm going to if I can send this account ID to this function. Will it work for each and every account ID of my accounts table? Will it work? Let's try to run this and see. Yes, it actually works and it is actually fetching me all the accounts balances. So that's great. So this is one of the reason that we use functions because we can set we can use it in a select statement. Like we use like we use functions like min, max, count, and average. Right? So this is how we can use it. We can automate what the inputs that we need to send into this function, right? So this is how we can create our own customized functions. Now let's see some more of it. So we have seen functions, so let's look at how we can use cursors into this thing. So if we want to do some sort of operation that is very customized on records which cannot be easily done using a select statement, then we can go for a cursor and do whatever we needed. So I'm creating a function again. It's called the list transactions. I want to list all the transactions, and this returns an object of type table. So this is interesting. So I have to say I'm going to return a table using this keyword table, and I have to say, so what are the columns? It is going to return a transaction ID, a transaction type, amount, numeric, a transaction date. Right? I'm selecting only a few. I'm not selecting the entire table. I'm only selecting a few columns of it, and the output is going to be a table, and it is what I'm going to return. So that's how I'm saying it, right? So now I have the language PL-SQL. As now I'm going to declare. I'm declaring a cursor called as a transaction cursor. It is of a type cursor for this DBMS statements called select transaction ID from transaction where account ID equals to the ACC ID, which will be provided to the function, and I'm going to order by the transaction rate in the descending. So I'm ordering it, and whatever the output, so what are the output that we have got, it is going to be a table, right? So we'll see how we are going to handle that. So now let's begin the function. So the function is working for. Okay, so this is a for loop. So we have seen the a normal loop in our previous video where it exits when a record is not found, but now this is a for loop. So this internally checks how many number of records are there, and it will automatically close itself when there is no record. So we have created a for loop and we are ending the loop. So what are we returning in between? So for the transaction ID and transaction type, amount and transaction in this cursor, you loop and you return the next. So what is this next? So next is actually we can call it as a record pointer. So it will have the reference of that entire record. So we are going to return that. Right? So this is much clear about how it works. So if we were to select all of it for each of them, I'm going to loop through it. I'm going to return the next. So the next will be returned in the form of a table that we have specified above. Let's create this function. It says there was an issue for transaction ID. Have one target variable. Okay. 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 It must have a transaction type. Okay. We'll see how it works in the next video. Fine. Okay. Okay. We need to select. So we need to use the function as a resource in this way. Uh, Okay, it's not ideal that we did it. Now let's try to create triggers instead of this. Let's try and execute this. So here I created another function called as prevent overdraft, which returns a trigger. And what are we doing? We're saying if our new table's a transaction type, if it is a withdrawal, then if the balance of the account ID, if it's less than the new amount, then you need to raise an exception a transaction was denied due to insufficient funds. So why is it the case? It's because if I'm selecting the balance and if it is less than the amount, then I shouldn't allow that a transaction to happen, right? So let's run this and let's use an example on this to understand how it works. Let me run this. The function is created, and now let's create a trigger, right? So we have this function. I want a trigger to be called. Okay, so this is my trigger. So my trigger name is check balance before withdrawal. So before withdrawal, you have to check the balance. So when should I check? I have to check it before insertion on the transaction. Okay, if I have inserted it into the transaction, that means we did the transaction. But no, you should stop the transaction. You should abort the transaction if there is an insufficient funds thing, right? And it should work for each row. I'm writing for each row. So what should I execute? You should execute the function called as the prevent overdraft. So this is the function that will check for it, and it will raise an exception if something of this sort happens. And then we should return the new, which will have the value which is supposed to be there. So it is of the type trigger, right? So we have created trigger, and we have created a function for this. If we try to if we try to do this on the transactions, it is going to throw me an exception if an account uh, uh, doesn't comply with whatever the functionality we have seen, right? And let's create another one. Update balance after transaction. This is a trigger. So we have a function which will update the balance after transaction. So it will see if the a transaction type is deposit. I'm going to update the account and set the balance equals to the new amount where account ID is new account ID. Else if. So this is how we write else if. It's not ELSE IF. It's else if. A unique syntax. So we'll see if the new transaction type is withdrawal, then you have to update the accounts and set the balance equals to the balance minus new amount where account ID is equals to new account ID. So what am I doing? If it's a deposit, why am I adding some amount? And if it's withdrawal, I am removing the amount. But why am I doing this on a table called transactions and not on accounts? So there may be a case where you're not uh, dealing with the accounts, but if you want to do some sort of updation on the transaction, right? So you're only given access to the transaction table, so you're only working on the transaction table. So you try to update something. So if you're doing something, it has to be it has to be reflected on the accounts table as well, right? So that's how this function works. Now let's create the trigger so that we'll see when it gets into action. So here we go. So this is the trigger. So we have created a trigger called update balance after insert on the transaction. So I let's say I have inserted something into the a transaction. If that a transaction is not reflected on the accounts, it is actually a illegal transaction because it is not complying with what the accounts at a table is showing, right? So we're creating an after insert on the transactions for each row. Execute the function update balance after transaction. Right? So that's how we work with them. And then yeah, let's try with this. Let's try to insert values into the transaction. Did we execute this? So function is created, right? With the function, so we created the function and then we have updated the balance. So now we have two triggers on this transaction table. Now let's try to run one of these. Now we are trying to insert into the transaction some values for one, where the account ID one is now only having some amount around 3,500, but I am trying to withdraw an amount of 5,000. So there is there is some sort of insufficient funds. So will the a trigger rise? Let's run see. It's saying there is an error. The new role for relation account violates the check constraint. Accounts balance check. So we write this right. So we created this trigger, failing to the row because it might result in a negative value. Right. So this trigger works, and let's see, and let's do another one. Okay. Here I'm trying to insert into the transaction some deposit thing, and it actually works, but I want it to be reflected. So will it happen? So it got inserted uh, okay, into the current timestamp. If I were to select it, so for number two, so did we get, so did we have any updation? Yes. So this amount was inserted into it. So that's how the triggers enforce rules on the data. So to make sure they happen in our correct way. Okay, let's write a store procedure. Okay, let's see store, not this one. And now I have a big procedure for you, a little bit scary, but I'm gonna explain it because it's actually a real-time example of how the banks work. Oh, great. So here I'm trying to create a procedure called calculate and apply interest. So the interest will be applied to an account in between. Okay, if it happens twice a year in the month of September and March. So they will check what's your minimum uh, balance in each month in between the date 10th and the end of the month, and whatever the minimum balance is there, they're going to fetch all the minimum balances in this a time period of 6 months, and then calculate interest on it. Okay, so, okay, how can we automate this procedure, right? So we declared a few things. We declared a record type, and we did some constraints. So this is going to be our interest rate, and it will be constant. So we can enforce some variable to be constant using the constant keyword. And let's begin. So let me extract the month from the current date and year. So I have extracted it, and I'm inserting into my interest month and interest year. So the interest is only applied on March 1st or the September 1st. Then I have to see if the interest month is not in 3 or 9, then the interest can only be calculated. Now I'm not going to calculate this, right? And I'm going to return. And if it's not, then I'm going to iterate through the accounts, and from the opening date I'm going to see if the date is in between my interest months 10 and the 28th last date of the month, assuming that. And we're going to skip the accounts which are opened after 10th for the first interest month. We're going to we're going to skip those accounts, and then we're trying to find the minimum balance between the 10th and the last day of the previous month. So I'm going to set the balance on the transaction where account ID is in between the transaction. So this will be as a subquery, and I'm going to collage it in. I'm going to calculate the minimum value of that variable balance in between that start date and end date, right? So I will have this in my min balance. Now I'm going to check if the min balance is zero. Then okay, if it is zero, then I'm going to select the balance into min balance from accounts and end it, and I'm going to calculate the interest amount. So this is a formula. I'm going to calculate it, and I'm going to update my accounts. I'm going to add the interest amount to whatever the previous balance it was holding, and I'm going to insert it into the transaction. By inserting, we are going to, okay, so it will be reflected into the account statement, right? So this is a very long procedure. So so this is how a real, okay, so I just wanted to show you, you know, a real world up procedure, how it actually looks like. So this is actually a great way you can look into this. So I think we did learn a lot of a lot about PL-SQL and SQL. So I think it would be enough for us to understand the internal processing of a DBMS. So and that's all for the video.